Sometimes it can be hard to play something that inspires you when you're improvising a solo. You can play a lot of things on a Cmaj7, and in this video I'm going to cover some of my favorites when it comes to arpeggios, triads and pentatonic scales. And I'm also going to cover some of the strategies that I use when I'm making lines so that you can make some solid lines with the same material. At the end of this video you should have a lot of things that you can start working with, and it's really just about using stuff that you already know but coming at it from a different angle with some fresh perspective. I'm going to focus on how it sounds. I think that's really what inspires the most. And then I'm also going to talk about how I'm making the melodies, because it's not only about what notes you're playing, it is as much about how you're making melodies with it that's going to give you some new material that you can use. I think that's also going to be evident from the first example. My name is Larsen, learn jazz, make music. I'm going to keep this really basic, so just think this Cmaj7 and just a basic C major scale. And I'm not really going to use any exotic scale choices or strange notes in that way, but we are going to start with just the most basic arpeggio that you need to know. So this 1 octave Cmaj7 arpeggio. And even though you've probably done a lot with the basic arpeggios, then there's always something new you can start working with. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of that. Here's the first one. Using chromatic enclosures and small chromatic phrases is just a great way to just transform a basic arpeggio into some pure bebop material. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. So here I'm really just playing the arpeggio, but I'm starting with this chromatic enclosure, so up the arpeggio. And then I'm just going down the arpeggio again, but I'm first adding these approach notes from A down to G, so, and then ending on the 3rd. And this is something you can do with a lot of different chromatic phrases, and of course also just different ways of playing the arpeggio. Another really basic example could be something like this. So again, first playing the ascending arpeggio, but now I'm adding a chromatic enclosure for the 3rd, so, and then further up the arpeggio, and then adding this chromatic phrase at the end of it, ending on the 7th. Very often when I'm transcribing solos, then I come across a melody and I'm thinking, that sounds fantastic, I wonder what it is. And then it's very often just the arpeggio played in a different order or some sort of pattern within a basic arpeggio. For instance, one of my favorites from Chord is this melody, which is really just a Cmaj7 arpeggio played in a pattern. There's another Jesper van Ruller line that I checked out that was using this type of arpeggio for a major 7 arpeggio. So there are all these great melodies that you can use, which are just changing the order and playing some patterns within an arpeggio. And that's really something you want to try to explore. So just try and play them in different patterns, different orders. And I would say you can of course do this systematically, but it's also just useful just to sit down, play it, and listen and see if you get an idea from it. That's probably the easiest way, unless you of course come across a great thing in a solo like I just talked about. Here I'm using the one from Chord, so I'm just playing the descending major triad first, and then going up to the 7th, and then adding this tag on it to end it on the 5th. Another really solid option is of course the diatonic arpeggio found on the 3rd of the chord. So in this case for Cmaj7, that's an E-7 arpeggio. Mostly when we're practicing arpeggios, then they are either scale exercises and we're playing all the diatonic arpeggios, or we're playing them in positions. But in that way we're actually missing out a little bit, because there are some places where it really makes sense to get out of the position and then reach a little bit further. And that's what I'm doing in this example. So the first part of this is really just using the E-7 arpeggio, but I'm not staying in position like this because I'm playing first this part, which of course is still in the position. Then I'm reaching out to grab the high E here and getting a larger interval, but also just getting some notes that are not in the position, and that way getting access to some new melodies. So, and then rounding it off with just a short scale melody. This technique doesn't work everywhere because sometimes you can't reach more notes just by spreading your fingers a little bit. It's gonna get too far. But in this case, you can actually shift up a position and then you get a line like this. So here I'm really using the arpeggio even more, and it's of course coming out of this basic version of the arpeggio, but then I'm adding the G that I can reach up and grab here. So that's all E-7 arpeggio. The first few examples here have been using sort of the basic material that you probably already know, but then trying to add something so that we get some more interesting new melodies with it. This next example is a little bit of a less obvious choice, and that's also a little bit more vague, but then that really opens up for a lot of other things. To me, sus4 triads are really sort of a secret weapon. Not that many people are talking about it, and they really sound great in a lot of places. They're also a little bit vague, they're not that clear in the chord. In that way, they're also easier to make repeating figures with and still sound kind of interesting. And that's what I'm doing here. So I'm using a G sus4 triad on top of the Cmaj7. Again, this is just the root, the 5th and the 9th, so it's not really clear in the chord, but it works really well as this 5-note grouping that I'm playing with it. And I'm repeating that pattern so that we get this melody that's shifting on top of the meter and then rounding off the line with a descending Cmaj7 arpeggio. Another way to play the same set of notes as the G sus4 is to play this beautiful C quintal arpeggio. So here we usually just get 2 5th intervals on top of each other, and that's just a nice way to add some large intervals to your lines, and in that way just make them a little bit more dramatic. And that's also really what I'm working with in this example, because I'm of course playing first that quintal arpeggio, then moving on to this E sus4 triad, and then skipping down, and then up a 6 to really get from this low note up to this high note, and in that way creating a fairly dramatic effect in the line. The E sus4 triad is another sus triad that's really effective on a Cmaj7, so let's have a look at how we can use that as well. Where the G sus4 was a little bit vague on top of the chord and not really giving us sort of the important notes to get the sound of the chord across, then the E sus4 is actually really spelling out the chord, because if you relate this to a Cmaj7, then we have the E, which is just the 3rd, so then we have one of the important notes, and the other important note is the B, that's also in the chord, that's the 7th, and then we also have an A, which in this case is like a 13th, and really just adding some color to the sound of the melody. And here in the example, I'm using first a Cmaj7 arpeggio, and then I'm using the sus4 triad again as a repeating pattern, now as a 3-note group. So this is actually kind of typical for what you will hear Kurt Rosenwinkel and Mark Turner do in a lot of solos, especially sort of the period around Dharma Days, the Mark Turner album. So we have this, and then I'm rounding off with this phrase ending on the 9th of the chord. And here I'm again using the fact that the sus4 triad is a really nice pattern to repeat without getting boring, simply because it's a little bit more exotic than just playing a triad or a 7th chord arpeggio. The pentatonic scale is very closely related to quartal harmony, and that's of course also something that we can use if we want to improvise over a Cmaj7, because we just need to find a pentatonic scale that works well with the chord, and then we can use those types of melodies to create a quartal harmony sound on top of the chord. In this case, I'm using the E minor pentatonic scale because that's really a great sound on top of a Cmaj7. If we just spell out those chords, then that's going to be the 3rd, the 5th, 13 or 6, the 7th, and the 9th. So in that way we just have all the good notes for a Cmaj7, and you can of course use that with the pentatonic scale melodies to get quartal harmony like. And that's also what I'm doing in the example. So first we have this quartal arpeggio, then running down an E-7 arpeggio, another quartal arpeggio, and another quartal arpeggio, and then ending on the E, the third of the Cmaj7. In this example, I'm using a G major and an A minor triad to make the line. This is a great triad pair for a Cmaj7, besides being sort of the foundation for the most annoying picking exercise that I've ever made. The way that I like to use triad pairs in lines is really just to play the different triads next to each other and chain them together in different inversions to create melodies, because in that way you're really sort of taking advantage of the triad pairs and getting first the sound of this triad and then the sound of another triad. And that's also what I'm doing here. So first the the A minor triad in second inversion, then first inversion G major, and then another second inversion A minor, and then root position G major triad, and then ending on the ninth again, the D. When you create lines like this, then you get a different sound from all the other lines that you're making if you're playing more bebop oriented or quartal harmony ideas. That really means that you have something else that you can use in your solo that also sounds different, and that's of course also kind of the point of having more options. This also creates really strong melodies because the triads are just really strong structures melodically. If you want to have more options when you're improvising, then a great resource to check out is of course the triads. The upper structure or the superimposed triads that we use on top of chords is something that's going to give us a lot of different types of sounds, colors and melodies. If you want to check out a video where I'm going over this in more detail, how you apply it to several different chords, give you some ideas on how you can explore finding triads for whatever chord you want to improvise over, then check out this video where I'm going over a lot of the diatonic triads, but also some alter scale triads for a 2-5-1 in C major.